Joining me now, prime sponsor of House Bill 1720, Democratic Representative Mike Chapman, and Republican co-sponsor, Representative Joel Kretz. Thank you both for being here today. I'd like to start with you, Representative Chapman. This bill envisions a voluntary grant program without rigid technical specifications. Why do you think a voluntary approach is the way to go with this bill?
Well, we need to make sure that the ag community can be, asked to give up some of their land. That's what they're being asked to do, and we wanted to do it in a voluntary way. No erroneous restrictions, no rules, they want to do the right thing, but they also need to make a living. And I think the important part of this bill is that it is a voluntary program, and we're going to ask ag to give up a little bit of their working land to do the right thing for salmon recovery, and it just seems like the right thing to do. And what's wrong with doing the right thing in Olympia?
What's your perspective, Representative Kretz?
Well, I think both the tribes and agriculture are frustrated. The tribes are frustrated that we haven't made as much progress on salmon recovery, riparian restoration as we should have. It's been slow. And I think ag is nervous about being told what to do. Typically, that's been the model, is someone comes in with regulatory authority and tells them how it's going to be. And that's what we're trying to get away from in this one. I think we've got a unique opportunity to make progress on riparian areas, but with a voluntary approach instead of the old way of force and regulatory means. And I think we can do better things this way. I'm getting a lot of innovative ideas from ag on things that they can do, which will help the riparian areas, but also help their operations in many cases.
So I want to follow up with you, Representative Kretz, in terms of the types of projects or situations that maybe come to mind when you think about what the goal of this bill is. Can you give me an example of a riparian habitat?
Sure, I can give you one right off my own ranch. We had a riparian area that I wanted to reduce livestock impacts on. We did some fencing to where I can do a different rotational grazing to where they're not in that area even as much. But I think the key was we did, instead of the old method of fencing huge buffers off and taking that land out of any use, we put off-site watering areas. We've got tanks up the hill, and when a cow comes off a hill on a hot day, they're going to stop at that tank. And I would say we've probably reduced the riparian movement and impact probably by 95% without taking away anything from anybody.
And Representative Chapman, in terms of the sorts of stories that you've heard or during the deliberation process, what were some of the things you were keeping in mind as far as trying to find a voluntary workable solution?
Like Representative Kretz mentioned, I think this is an issue that's of vital importance to both the ag community and our tribal friends. And I think in listening to both sides, there was a lot more in common, which was restoring habitat that would benefit salmon, and less not in common. There was no reason to find areas of conflict. There's reasons. This bill, is designed to find areas of commonality. And it is also part of why, as the chair of the Ag and Natural Resource Committee, one of the first things that I put on the table was this would be a bipartisan bill or it would be no bill. And that really changed the framework of how we approach this, because I think generally when you have the gavel and you're the party, you control the agenda, it's somewhat implied that at the end of the day, something can move out on a party line vote. But on this issue, because of the commonality that I knew existed, especially in a district like mine where I've seen the ag community work with our tribal friends and reach across and work together, like listen to each other. And I've been out on the land, I've talked, I've seen it happen. I was like, this can't be a partisan bill. This can't be a one-size-fits-all bill for the state driven by one party. And so I think for me, it was just simply, putting it on the table that it was going to be bipartisan. Then as chair, you almost have to sit back and listen. And I've learned so much. Joel and I have spent, a number of hours just talking about things, and with so many other folks. So, yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about the process?
Well, it's really unusual for a chair to decide we're going to do this on a bipartisan approach. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. Ag natural resource shouldn't be a partisan issue in most cases. And I think what it allowed was to build some relationships. I've had some great discussions with members of the tribes. Ron Allen has been great in this. Leonard Forsman has provided a lot of help. He's also been a skeptic, which is a good thing. We need to discuss everything on these, but the biggest thing for me is the trust that I've seen between two groups that have sometimes been in opposition with each other. We're finding how much we have in common, how many goals I think that we share, and it's changed the whole dynamics into, we're asking the tribes to trust a little, and we're asking ag to trust a little. Everybody's nervous. I think that's maybe the perfect bill, right? When everybody's a little bit nervous, but I think we're doing things that we wouldn't have done in a partisan manner.
During some of the testimony on the bill, I heard some skepticism from some of the treaty tribe stakeholders involved in this about the results and whether or not this was going to really lead to results. Is this sort of a test case?
Oh, I think it is. It's absolutely innovative, and I think the difference here, I can tell you, I've got a long driveway, 3 miles long. Somebody comes up to my door, and I like to listen. Again, anybody that can make it up that driveway is worth listening to. But if they come to the door and say, you're going to do this, the door closes, and don't let the gate hit you in the butt on the way out is kind of where I'm at. It's really different when somebody comes to the door and says, hey, we've got something that we want to address. Can we sit down and talk about it? And at that point, you have a cup of coffee and you try and make progress, which I think is what is so different about this bill, is we're all going on a leap of faith that we can do good things without damaging agriculture.
What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I was a county commissioner for 16 years, and I remember so many times where maybe the road engineers drew a new road through a road improvement through a neighborhood, and the engineers draw the lines, and you kind of look at buffers, the same thing. There'll be lines on a map, but the reality is, how many times did I go out and just kind of walk the neighborhood with the folks and have someone say, hey, Grandpa, planted that tree. Is there any way we can, move the road a little over? And I think that's what I envision. Yeah, there's lots of regs. At the end of the day, there's a lot of regulations on people's land. But here's what I envision. I envision people walking the land and experts with the landowner, with our tribal friends saying, if you just did X, Y, or Z right here, we're going to get a really good benefit for that. And have the landowner look at that on the land. And so instead of, be easy to draw lines. Like we could, there's maps that have buffer lines on every waterway in this state that are done here in Olympia, and that's important work, right? It does kind of delineate. But this bill is envisioning just what Joel was talking about. Don't just show up with a map with some lines. Why don't you come talk to me? And why don't we build a friendship and a relationship, and why don't we figure out what works? And I think, how can you have a bill that wants people to do that if we didn't do that on the upfront side? And I think that's what Joel's right. Trust. It's all about trust now. And we got to get this bill through over the finish line, and we got a lot of work to do, and we got to continue to build trust. But it's a different approach on legislation, and I think it's people say, why don't you all work together? Well, we're working together. Like, they want us to work together in Olympia, and we don't even talk about DC anymore, but this is a bill that we're going to work together, but it also envisions working together on the land with the farmer, with the landowner, with the Conservation Commission, with the experts.
If I could add too, part of the reservations were there's no regulatory component in this, and that scares people. They want to drive results with regulation. I would just point out that none of the regulatory regime is gone. They're still out there. They're doing fine. They're well funded. And if this doesn't work, that's probably what we're looking at. This is an attempt to do it in a cooperative way with trust, looking people in the eye and coming up with good solutions. But the regulatory world is always out there.
As sort of a follow-up to that, the governor's office signed in opposed to the legislation. The policy lead from the governor's office on this issue was saying that the two major issues they have are that there's no minimum standard, and that could, on the one hand, they're skeptical about what the results would be without that, and then also there's potentially federal grant funding or federal funding that maybe potentially put at risk without such a standard was, I believe, part of the argument. And the other part was basically the role of the agencies that are involved in this. More involvement from those agencies is what they'd like to see. What do you think about adding those to the bill, or What do those issues generate when you think about that?
Well, when we got the first draft, we had it drafted in some ways like every other bill around here, with agency after agency after agency, half a page, and down at the bottom, agriculture and tribes. And I felt like that was upside down. To do something different and take a different approach that I think is going to give us benefit, we put the tribes and agriculture at the top and put the agencies in the fine print. They'll still be involved in the process as far as they're a resource. They can help us target areas that we need to go. But I really feel more trust. I'd like to put it in the hands of agriculture and the tribes right now and let them direct the process. I think we've tried decades of the heavy-handed regulatory approach, and I don't think it works. I think we're going to see some really innovative projects come forth. I've got landowners that, once they understand the process, people that I never would have thought would have come forward are saying, I can think of 6 or 8 things that I would do on my farm or ranch, as long as it's with the conservation district, as long as there's no regulatory component. I'm wide open. Let's sit down and talk. That's what we need to be getting to.
What's your perspective on that and sort of the interplay between the governor's office and then these deliberations?
You know, the legislature is an equal branch of government, and so and I've been asked by my colleagues to chair the Ag and Natural Resource Committee, and we had a hearing today, and people, most of the significant portion of the testimony in a hearing we had today came from my district. But I have a job to do, and that is to shepherd legislation through the committee. There was governor request legislation that was introduced. We had a hearing, and it became clear early on that that bill probably couldn't pass with a bipartisan vote. And that was my commitment from day one on this issue, that it should be bipartisan. So we rolled up our sleeves. Honestly, it was Chairman Allen from the Jamestown Tribe and President Rosella Mosby from the Farm Bureau. They did most of the negotiation and kind of the writing the framework of this bill. Now, they've had to go to their constituents and their friends and other, Ron's talked to tribal leaders, and other tribal leaders have came in, and many, were either other or supportive. But it was building a friendship and a relationship between, Ron and Rosella that was really the genesis for this bill. I think Representative Kretz and I, he's a leader on his caucus, and I'm leading the committee, and we've got work to do. But I think the less, just laying a bill down and saying this is the bill that I want. So obviously that was some of the objection from the governor's office, as it wasn't the governor's request legislation. So to a degree, once that bill couldn't move, they kind of have to oppose any other approach. Right? That's just part of the process of an equal branch of government. That didn't bother me. We're still ready to move a bill on Friday, right? And I don't think the governor's office is still supportive yet, but we're listening, and they have input. So
let's talk about the way that this program would work in terms of the state's funding component. Some of the concerns that came up even from supporters of the bill were that there are programs that are meant to encourage landowners to protect habitat, and some of those incentivize different options. The voluntary stewardship program is one that was mentioned, but that those programs have sometimes been described as chronically underfunded. Is that a concern with this legislation too, the need for this to be funded?
It's not, because I think, one thing in both the legislature or local government, if a program is successful, politicians find a way they want to fund it, right? If it's a successful program, if it's building success, if it's doing what we need to do to restore some of these riparian areas, I don't see that, funding in the future is going to be an issue. I think we wanted to build a piece of a policy, and we're the policy committee, and the funding will come down the road, but we wanted to build a policy that other elected officials, both Republican and Democrat, that it would be a priority to say, wow, this is an innovative approach, this is bipartisan, this is exactly what we kind of talk about, let's fund it. And then the people on the ground will, when there's success, and with a bill like this, there will be success. There will be people, landowners, stepping up, saying, I want to do these projects. And when there's success breeds success in this business, and the support of the public too. So who's going to want to cut the funding to something that's working restoring habitat, working with landowners. Remember, ag is a huge part of our economy in our state, so we want to make sure that they continue to grow the fruits and vegetables and raise the products that literally Washington, feeds the world in some respects. We're a huge exporter, and in today's challenging times, it's really refreshing to know that we have such a strong ag economy. So this bill was recognizing the importance of salmon recovery efforts while also respecting and putting on the table the hard work of the men and women of the agricultural community that I believe again, that's not a partisan issue. We all, we're all going to eat Washington-grown products at some point this week. Maybe today, hopefully.
Representative Kretz, in terms of the framework, Representative Chapman just talked about the importance of, putting agriculture, noting agriculture in this bill and planning with it with agriculture in mind. Can you give me an example of, or a hypothetical, how this might affect a typical property owner in Washington?
Well,
who lives on a stream or
sure.
a riverbank?
Well, most of them do. It's obviously different in eastern and western Washington, the conditions, the environment, and the bill looks at that. Let's go on a more of a regional approach, which sets a lot of people at ease. I think riparian areas on the west side are really different than the east side. And with that assurance, I think people are a little more comfortable of being really innovative on looking for ways. We all want to benefit riparian areas. We want healthy streams and fish and clean water. We're all in agreement on that, but the old approach has been you will do it and you will do it this way, and if not, this is what happens to you. And that's not a way to start any discussions. The only way this program is going to work is people flocking to it, and I think we're going to see an interest from agriculture that we probably haven't seen before. They would like to see all those things, all those qualities, just like the tribes are asking for. But they also want to do it in a way they can survive, and I think the past model has not been that way. It's been, you will do this, and that's kind of a non-starter for most farmers or ranchers that I know, and I think it's a non-starter for the tribes in that situation. Nobody likes being told what you have to do. Let's look for innovative ways to make progress, and I think that the upside of this thing is unbelievable.
It's been almost 25 years since the forest and fish law went into place here. And it laid out standards primarily impacting timber harvest related to riparian buffer zones, the areas close to rivers and streams. This is a different sort of, it's a similar issue. It's not necessarily the same legislation, but do you see some commonalities between the two?
Yeah, and I'm really, yes, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. In fact, during working on this bill, a picture, an old picture was sent to me of Billy Frank Jr. and Mark Doment, who was a legislator that I think was state senator at the time and he was out of Grace Harbor, and another gentleman, and they were smiling. They're in the woods together and they were smiling. And I think of the friendship. Sometimes it isn't about the legislation per se, but sometimes it is about the legacy you're building, the friendships you're building, and in my case, being a chair saying, you know what, I want to get this right, and the only way to get it right is that both parties come to the table and work together, that it be bipartisan. On this particular issue, I'm just committed that nobody has a monopoly on what the right policy is, but everybody has a vested interest in coming together. And for me, the friendships are almost as important as the legislation. And I think you talk to the people who worked in forest and fish, tough negotiations, a much bigger issue, but at the end of the day, some significant friendships came out of that. And I think, like I said, Representative Kretz and I probably spent more time together this session so far. And, it's friendships are really important in this business.
We've got just about a minute left. If you could encapsulate your closing thoughts on this.
Well, where this really started for me, we had a dinner out at Jim Wilcox's place about a year ago. A number of tribal leaders, ag leaders, some forestry people. And it was a discussion that night kind of focused on what we're talking about, trust and things that have worked. The Nisqually model was mentioned repeatedly. Jim Wilcox told a story from back in the 80s where he was scared to death with regulation and was opposed to all the efforts they were trying in the Nisqually. And Billy Frank Jr. got up and said, we want to clean this river up, we want to clean this environment up, we want to make progress, but I want my friends at Wilcox Farms there, I want the timber people here, and he made sure that everyone felt included. Jim Wilcox said that was a turning point for me. I've been a believer ever since. The Nisqually model it's not perfect, but it sure has made more progress than anything I can think of, and my hope is that we're building something like that on a statewide basis.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you, Representative Kretz, Representative Chapman. We appreciate your time.